Welcome to all of our attendees this morning. So, power tools and plumbers. What do you need to know? What are the dangers and what are the checks that plumbers should be doing on their power tools? Now, what are the dangers with portable electrical tools? Well, one of the biggest or most common and serious dangers is electrical injuries. And this occurs when the electrical current from the actual source of where you're connecting that electrical tool flows between your hands and feet. Normally, what happens is a person will touch an energized line. So, the source of power, this normally comes from the outlet, and that electrical energy or electricity is looking for the shortest path to get back to the ground. And generally, if you are touching it, it will pass from your hands and rush through your body into your feet. Now, when this happens, obviously it's going through your heart and your lungs, and this is most of the time what gets damaged when a person gets electrocuted. It's all the organs between your hands and your feet because the electricity is looking obviously to get to the ground in order to stabilize. However, it's moving through a person's body, and a heart and lung, obviously, you know that your body is reliant on these organs. And so when they start burning or becoming electrocuted, uh, they start shutting down. And a lot of times somebody can die from this type of electrocution. If it's not very strong electrocution, perhaps it's coming from a different source or a smaller source of energy, then a person can still sustain serious injuries. A lot of times it's also uh, burns on the hands, burns on the fingers, burns up the arm, where the electrical source has been touched. Many are actually touching the source of the power from very high voltage or high amperage lines. And this is where uh, very, very serious injury will occur, where a person then is not just electrocuted, but burns from the inside out. And it will always start, obviously, through um, the organs within a person's body. And so, yes, working with electrical tools, powered electric tools, whether this be a grinder or a drill, or even an electrical extension cord that you bring to site in order to plug in your power tools, are very dangerous to be used. And so, do we understand the dangers? Do we take the time to explain not just what the dangers are, but why it actually happens to our employees? And if you are an employee listening in, do you understand why this actually happens? Has it happened to you where you've plugged a piece of electrical tool in and you've had a small shock? Perhaps you think, wow, that was just a bit of a jolt and you felt okay. You laughed about it and continued on. Well, why does that happen? Well, two main reasons that we want to discuss today is the first one is the incorrect or damaged wiring. Now, many times when we buy tools in SA, there's the right tool for the right job, and we constantly say that. Please ensure that your tools are in good condition. You're buying them from a reputable manufacturer. But at the same time, we do get cheaper tools on the market. And this is something very difficult to get through to many, that you should not be buying the cheapest tool on the market just because it has a name brand. You also need to take a look at the scope of work that you're performing, how often you're going to be using this tool, and how much pressure or how much stress are you actually putting on the tool. You see, oftentimes we go for the cheapest model because it does the job once or twice. But let's say that we have to use this tool for 8, 10 hours a day. Well, then you can see the impact or the stress that you are actually putting on this portable electrical tool is immense. And so, would you rather not get one that can handle that type of work? And so, rather do your research before just going in and purchasing the cheapest tool. Oftentimes, it comes with a cable that is incorrect or a plug that is incorrect. And what we are noticing is guys just cut it off. They're putting on a 3-prong or putting on a 2-prong of their own without getting this inspected. And many times you get to a site and the guys say, we refuse to have this unless it's been checked by an electrician. And you think, well, that's a bit far. There's just 2 wires, live and neutral. What else do we need? Well, it does need to be earthed. In many, many tools, power tools come without an earth. And so, how are you ensuring that these tools have been earthed correctly, especially when they are being used on construction sites? When it comes to portable electrical tools such as your extension cords, many extension cords are too thin to be used for the purpose because they're being just cut and connected to another electrical extension. You see, sometimes when we get to a construction site, the source of power or the plug point where we need to get our power from is so far away from where we're working. And yes, we complain to the contracts manager or the project manager for the client or the principal contractor, stating that how can you do your job if there is no electricity in the area for you to perform it? And yes, it's frustrating. We get to some sites and we pull out our hair with many of these principal contractors not providing adequate power to the area that you need to be working. And then it's always your fault, you as the contractor not performing. So we understand your frustration and we appreciate that this is an ongoing battle on your site. But rather, again, do your research. Can you find either a generator? We know that's an expensive option. Many of you have gone that way, purchase generators for future because you realize the importance of not only having it, but also the cost benefit that will come down the line. You don't have stoppage of work, that costs you X, and a generator costs you X. And so you realize maybe after a few projects, you'll be able to pay that off. However, many of you are then preferring just to get longer extension cords, but please try not to connect those extension cords to each other. Get one that is designed to go the meters that you need. Yes, it costs a little bit more. And again, we understand the frustration of it's not your fault that you are having this problem. But just because it's not your fault does not mean it's not within your control. And so, as employees, please speak to your employer. As employers, please try and prepare for this. Look for those opportunities where there's a possibility for these things to happen. Again, as an employee, you have been charged with certain responsibilities on site, and that is to look after the power tools that have been purchased for you. Now, if we had to ask you, how many of you as employees purchase your own tools? We have had this in a few companies where you are subcontracted to your employer. And so you've got to have your own toolbox, your own vehicle, and all of this equipment. If you damage it, it's for your own cost. Most of you are actually working in companies where the company purchases that toolbox for you. They provide you with all the tools and the necessary equipment, and they expect you to look after it. And there's certain disciplinary procedures that go along with the damage of these tools. Now, why does this damage occur? Well, from an employee standpoint, there's lack of inspections. Now, what does lack of inspections actually mean? We understand that when you take the tool in your hand, you can generally visually see if there's something wrong with it. And oftentimes, if you see there's something wrong, you take it back and you ask it to be replaced. But the lack of inspections that we're talking about here is not that you are not checking the check sheet for that tool. It's that you're not checking the check sheet for that tool with the actual tool. And what we're seeing is many plumbers sitting inside their bucky with a safety file open, just going through every register and checklist, ticking everything off for the day so that your paperwork is in place in case the audit or safety officer comes around, but it's actually not being done on the tool. And we're not saying or pointing fingers at any specific person. It's just something that we have noticed. And because that has become a pattern, we are just encouraging you to please take a look at, if you are doing this yourself, rather don't, because the actual tool itself is what needs to be inspected. Don't just appease the safety officer, because later down the line, what's going to happen is that tool is going to have lack of inspections. It's going to start breaking, and it's going to cause an incident or an accident on site. And it could cost the life of that operator of that tool. Now, you do not want that on your conscience. You do not want it on your conscience that you are responsible, even as a supervisor, for checking whether the checklists and registers are being done, but how they are being done is extremely important as well. So poor maintenance then comes back to the second reason, and this is generally with supervision or employers. You see, although the general inspections, the registers and checklists need to be done by your employees on site, it is your responsibility as a supervisor and the employer to ensure maintenance programs are in place for your tools. Now, this can be done periodically. A lot of you plumbers out there are doing this weekly. On a Friday afternoon, all your tools come back into the stores, and your storeman is responsible then to inspect these tools, check that they're working, and ensure that they are ready then for Monday morning. And this is brilliant. We encourage as many of you to be able to do this as possible. A lot of the plumbers, what they have done when we've been chatting to them, is they've said that the supervisor of that team will then inspect it on Friday. He will then issue the tools back again on Monday, and as he's issuing it, he then sits with the tool and the employee, issues the tools, does the checklist, and then updates the safety file. Also, a brilliant way of doing your maintenance and inspections. But please also keep in mind that the paperwork is not just a tick tick box exercise. We don't just want to tick it off and say it's been done. We actually physically want to check the tool with those inspections as well. And then rushing the job, again coming back to the employee, but also as a result of the employer pushing the workers to do the work, even though the tools are not safe to use. And so we might say to ourselves, well, we don't have the time to go and buy another tool. We have to use the one that we currently have. You see, there's no time, there's no budget for this. Well, if we are using a damaged tool or a tool that is not safe to use, the consequences could be dire for ourselves using it, and then as a liability aspect for you as the employer. If you allow your employees or even tell them that they have to use it just for this job until tomorrow when you can purchase another one, you see, you could also be held liable for any incident or accident that happens. And we say this often, it hasn't happened to you yet. You have been lucky up to now, but that does not mean you have been safe. And so we do not want to rush the job with damaged tools that could have a very big impact on ourselves as well as our employer, employee, or even our client. Now, the second reason why this happens is the overloading of the actual board or the DB board where the electricity is actually coming from. And you could even overload any other source of energy depending on where you are getting that electricity from. Now, this is plugging in too many tools. If you have incorrect wiring, again, if you're trying to pull too much amperage or too much voltage through something without the correct wiring for the tool or your electrical extension cord. And poor preparation goes very far to being overloading. Why do we say poor preparation? Well, again, we do not do a site inspection to check where we are getting the electricity from and how many other contractors are working during our time. Now, you might say, well, that's not our responsibility. It comes down to the main contractor or the principal contractor to ensure the project is running according to plan. I don't know if I'd love to speak to each one of you. How many of you actually have a project that runs according to plan? How many of you have had a project that when the principal contractor is on site and he's got a project specification with a schedule that every single day it's 100% on the nose, that's how it happens? Well, these are generally very few and far between. Being a project manager myself in previous years, most of the projects, in fact 90% of the projects that I worked on, always had delays. There was always something that needed to be changed, uh, always coming from the client, always coming from the architect, making some sort of changes, new drawings issued, and this put on delays. And yes, if we didn't have this advanced preparation where we added in the possibility for this to occur, these P's and G's for your jobs, we realized that we were going to be stuck. And so poor preparation also encourages the overloading of sockets, because now we have a project to do, we have a job to do. Our scope says we have to get it done today, and yet there is insufficient electricity points for us to do it. But it's not our fault, is it? It's the principal contractor asking me to do it. And yes, it's easy to say that, but at the end of the day, you are still required to do that work yourself. And so, as employees, if you are pressurized in order to do that, please just take a step back. It's a few minutes to take a look at your schedule again and see, can this be done safely? There is always a way to make it safe. Even if you are pressurized or rushed into the job, or perhaps the entire schedule changes and the tools you are using are now going to have to work overtime or in different areas, there is always a way to make it safe. And so, when it comes to power tools, as we mentioned last week with hand tools, you must appoint a power tool inspector. If you are on a construction site, just take a look at the construction regulations 24E and the electrical machinery regulation. It depends on which one you're using. For lighting, you're going to use machinery regulation 10, but actually for power tools, and we should actually change this for you, it's going to be electrical machine regulation section 9. And then we always want to take a look at our HIRA assessment. HIRA is extremely important for any tools that we are actually using. And so when it comes to HIRA or hazard identification and risk assessment, we want to ensure that the tools that we are using, specifically power tools, are being inspected and that we have the hazard and risk associated with the use of these tools. Now, remember, we don't just want to include the scope of work. We have an issue-based and a task-based risk assessment. The issue that we are dealing with, or the piece of equipment that we are dealing with, is that power tool. And so we want to have every possible risk and hazard with that power tool, and then include the scope of work or the actual task that we are performing. And so our risk assessments must be a little bit more detailed on the type of tool we are using. And don't just say portable electrical tools. If you have it covered in your scope or in your task, for instance, you are now drilling a hole to put something on it, some sort of bracket in order to hang a geyser or hang a hydroboil, you will then cover the hazards and risks for the use of the drill. And obviously, your safe work procedure will always include the inspection of it. But many of us are losing out on the storage of our power tools. And this comes to the end of our risk assessment. When we wrap up for the day, when we complete our work for the day, you see, we're including housekeeping, which is brilliant. And we encourage you to continue to do that. Housekeeping is vital for our sites. But what we are missing out on is when we finish up our site, we also want to ensure the correct storage of all of our tools. And so please include that into your risk assessment and then make sure the employees understand what their responsibility is. From one, they use the tool. Secondly, they inspect the tool. And then thirdly, they go through and store that actual tool. And this is always at the end of the project. This can be a quick visual inspection. It's in addition to your actual register and checklist that you are doing daily for your portable electrical tools, and ensure that your storage is always in a clean and safe environment, not just chucked in the back of the van. Now, when we inspect tools before starting to work, what are you actually looking for? And a second question we're going to ask is, do you have a maintenance schedule? Now, here are a few things that we are going to be checking for electrical power tools. This is a very generalized one, so we use this for drills and things like that, but we have a separate one for grinders, and we have a separate one for electrical extension cords. And so if you've got a whole lot of drills that you're using, or perhaps saws or things like that, make sure that you've got the correct checklist for what you are inspecting. You see, because this is not all encompassing for the actual tool. Cables in good condition, yes, that's brilliant. They're free from joints, they properly secured, switches are in good condition. You might think, well, all of this can be used for a grinder as well. And yes, that's true. In fact, almost all of these things that you notice on this checklist can be used for a grinder. However, there are additional things for a grinder that need to be inspected as well. For instance, the rotation of a grinder is extremely important for the disc that is being used. Perhaps for the task that you're performing, cutting out walls, you're not going to be using a steel cutting disc. You want to be using a masonry disc for the cutting of a wall. And then, depending on how deep you're going to go, are you going to use a baby grinder or are you going to use a bigger grinder? See, this all depends on the type of tool that you are actually using, the type of scope that you are performing. And this is getting left out of many of our registers and checklists. You see, we don't want to treat it just as a tick box exercise. We don't want to be sitting in our buckies saying, yes, all the tools are fine because we're working with them. You see, they're currently being used on site, and because they're being used, they should be in good working condition. What we want to do is take the time and ensure our tools are actually in the safe situation or safe condition that we hope they are. And then just go through these checks, ensure that you have all of the necessary documentation to back it up. And again, we ask you the question, do you have a maintenance schedule? Are you taking them in to be checked? Do you take them to your stores or perhaps even back to the manufacturer for their own maintenance? These could be general type of maintenance, but chat to the manufacturer and see if you cannot be assisted through them as well. Excellent. Thank you very much